Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org.
You talk a lot about the importance of staying in the moment as opposed to, say, projecting into the future, which which I tend to do, I guess, and or say resisting one's current circumstances if those current circumstances are unpleasant. But it seems like it's such good advice because when you're obviously a lot of times when you're worrying or you're stressing out like worrying about if your book's going to be published or whatever it is, if you just come to the very moment where you're whatever sitting in your office and you're creating these wonderful manuscripts. There's so much good about that. So but why is it so difficult to stay in the moment? Why are we always projecting?
Because our brains are essentially designed to do that.
Okay. Is there a shortcut for making it easier to stay in the moment?
Well, really, it's about conscious intention. It's about bringing yourself to this moment and bringing yourself most especially to what's going on inside your body at this moment. We tend to be hyper lost within the world. And so we're constantly focused externally when it's really the internal experience in this moment that draws us back to the present moment. So how am I feeling right now in this moment? What sensations are occurring within my body? If we wanted to externalize that, we could say, what is the smell that I am smelling? What does it feel like to sit against this floor? We just got to tune ourselves into our senses, which are keyed into the present moment. And it's a real conscious intention of ours to do.
So what if someone, let's say that they have a presentation, they have to make it work, and they're nervous about it, and so if they're trying to get to sleep the night before, and they're physically kind of, they're keyed up and whatever. At that moment, if they were to say, okay, what am I experiencing? It would be, anxiety.
Yeah. So this is the thing that, I'm so glad. Sorry. I realized I cut you off, but I'm so jazzed. Okay. Basically, this is what has annoyed the crap out of me for like a very long time about spiritual practice and spiritual teachers is that we love to say that the now is always going to feel good. Screw that. It is not always going to feel good. Sometimes it's going to feel like hell. But we are in a process where we're learning to become better at feeling. And so you have to be present with literally whatever is happening at this moment. So if a person like that came to the present moment, it's not like it would be sunshine, gumdrops, and roses. They would be feeling anxiety. They would be feeling fear. And so I would say, be with the fear. In fact, when you're trying to do everything you can do to get away from that fear and to get away from the anxiety and try to quell it, it's never going to work. You got to go straight into it, head first. All right, let's explore this. Let's dive intentionally and with my consciousness, dive straight into the worst case scenario. And when we release resistance to that, we find that fear no longer has us anymore by the throat. So, that would be what I would say.
So let's take an example that I'm sure you must have experienced. So as a writer, people send out queries and they send out their work, manuscripts, book proposal, and they come back and they get a rejection. And I don't care how much you're prepared for it. And, you think, I'm going to send it out. They're probably going to say no. But, if they say yes, it'd be great. And then you actually get the rejection. And it's like a gut punch, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so what you're saying is stay with that feeling.
Yes.
Okay. Because most people want to overcome it.
No, don't try to do that. Because you're basically, if you try to do that, what's happening is you're in a tug of war against the aspect of you that feels hurt and the aspect of you that's telling yourself not to feel that way. And it's just going to build, it's going to become sort of your subconscious. It'll become a subconscious fear you haven't directly faced. So what I would say in that moment when you feel that rejection is be with that aspect of you that feels rejected. And it's an intense, I guess, a really beautiful practice, I could say, to take the aspect of you that is more transcendental, the more adult side of you, and caretake the aspect of you that feels crappy about it.
I see.
We got to be willing to admit that it sucks.
Right.
We have to be willing to say, you know what? It's okay that it sucks. And we got to be willing to sit with that aspect of ourselves that needs us to be unconditionally present with it through that particular process. And what you'll find is very quickly a person's vibration starts raising. And then very quickly you'll be inspired to send out that manuscript again.
So you're saying that when we're we're under our desk in the fetal position, clutching the printout of our rejection, we should stay there. And I know I can see what you're saying, because you don't want to resist what is, right. You don't want to resist that moment. At the same time, you want to be able to get past it, because if you take too much of that energy and if you sit with it for too long, aren't you going to believe that negative aspect of your work?
No. In fact, that's the misnomer. That's what we've been told for years to try to keep us out of being with that aspect of ourselves. But you got to look at it this way. When we're like consciously present with ourselves, which is what that scenario ultimately is, it's us being unconditionally present for ourselves, we're introducing the high vibration of human consciousness. Should I say even beyond human? I guess the vibration of our soul. We're introducing that frequency to the feeling of rejection. And so it is doing the healing in and of itself. So it's our fear that we're going to get stuck in that place that causes us to say, all right, chop, chop, it's time to not feel this way. And it's us just doing the same thing our parents did to us, if you want me to tell you the honest truth. It was frustrating for mom and dad for us to cry longer than 2.5 minutes. So we've got this attitude, because our parents, of course, fed us with it, of like, all right, now it's time to brush it off and keep going. We got shopping to do. We got to quit this right now.
Right. But,
well, yeah, they don't like to see us emote, so it's better for us to squelch it, essentially, right?
Yeah, and so now we're telling ourselves the same lie. I've never seen it happen, not one time. And this whole idea that, like, you're sort of cathartic in misery, and that can happen emotionally, it doesn't actually jive with my experience of emotions. I've seen a lot of depressed people, too, people who've laid in bed for years at a time. If you have a campaign for anyone who would be, a wallowing type personality, it would be those types of people. But what I watch over and over again when they just let themselves completely sink is that it's almost like the hole in the bottom of that pit opens up and you drop through the bottom. You're saying, you know what, no more resistance. I feel like crap, and I'm just going to feel like crap for as long as I need to feel like crap. And the soul goes, oh, thanks for the permission. Let's move on.
Okay. As opposed to, say, having the tug of war where you're telling yourself, don't feel like crap, forget about this, but it still sits under the surface anyway, right?
Yeah, well, has it worked for anybody would be my number one question, because sure hell has not worked for me.
Right. So when you get a rejection, when you would get rejections, how would you move on from those?
I'd lie in the fetal position under my desk. I did not react to it well. I mean, it sucked, especially because some of the agents can be so nasty.
Right.
They don't even bother writing back anything nice. They're just like, pass. It's like, wow. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't do it well. I would lay in the fetal position, but being who I am and knowing what I know about the universe, I was like, you know what? We have to address this directly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit with this feeling of rejection. I'm going to figure out what I'm making it mean that I got that answer. I'm going to change, mess with the thoughts. I've got this whole process for how to change thoughts, but I would apply that process to, the thoughts I was thinking or the meaning I was adding to that experience. And then that would give me a different perspective. But I would only do that after I started to feel a little bit of relief just by virtue of sitting with that feeling. I would almost let it burn through me. Now, I know the way that the human ego works, essentially, and when you let an emotion burn through the human ego, you're actually like stripping onion layers off so that all you're left with is your true essential self.
That's interesting, because, one of the things I find, and I don't know if this is unconsciously doing the same thing, but I found when I would get a rejection, especially when the hopes were high for whatever I had sent out, that I would be when I was in the moment, when I was in the fetal position under the desk, I would know enough that in 2 days I'm going to feel fine, but it's going to take that long to get there, and so I would sit with it, knowing, okay, once I get there, it'll be fine, and 2 days later I'd be fine, and I'd be writing again and sending stuff out, but it would take that much time, and I had just allow myself that much time to experience it.
Yeah, see, so that's one version of doing it. It's just that I have one of those really naughty egos that's like, fine, you go ahead and put a timeline on it, and I'm going to ground you for a month. That's what it is. So, like, I literally had to make it, all right, you feel crappy for as long as you feel crappy.
Right, exactly. Well, I was hoping you had some, like, enlightened trick, but no, it sounds like, no, all right. So one of the tools for self-love that you mentioned in the book is embracing mistakes, and you point out that when we make those decisions that in retrospect turn out to be mistakes, we're always at the time making the best decision we had with the information that was available to us. But I was wondering, what about mistakes that are simply a matter of carelessness? In other words, it's not that you made a conscious decision to do something, but rather, but you weren't thinking and just being careless, and it turned out to be disastrous.
Well, I feel like those particular circumstances actually fit under the same criteria.
Okay.
So in that moment that you chose to be careless, it's not like you were actively choosing to be careless. You were still making the best decision you could with the information you had. It's just that the information you had was, this isn't going to matter much, when it really did matter much.
I see. Right. So in other words, you're saying not to, because a lot of times against self-love, people blame themselves for things that they did, even if it was carelessness. And so you're saying you can't beat yourself up for that.
No, hell no. I mean, what good is that going to do? You can't undo things. That's the sort of thing you come to when you're in a space of acceptance about letting things from the past go, is you literally have to get to a point where you're like, it's never going to work to undo what is done. I mean, it sounds it sounds easier than it is, but there is a moment, honestly, when you realize you're not going to revive a corpse.
Right, exactly.
And for some of us, that actually takes a long time to get to that place where we're like, you know what? I'm banging my head on a door that will never open. And until I stop banging my head on that door, then I'm stuck banging my head on the door. So basically, the minute you say, all right, the door's never going to open, that's the point at which you can see opportunities that exist to the side of that door. And maybe one of those opportunities is some kind of resolution. Maybe it is, if it's not a solving of the original circumstances, at least some new way to move forward with that. But we're preventing ourselves from that when we're continuing to beat our heads against the wall. And that's all we're doing when we're in a space of self-blame. But I mean, honestly, self-blame is really easy to understand. It looks like this. You have an internal moderator, kind of like an internal policeman, who just said, I'm sick of getting punished for doing things wrong, so I'm going to punish myself so that I know how hard I'm going to bleed. So those of us that are into self-punishment, we actually think it's virtuous. Our issue is our addiction to morality. And that was a big part that was cut out of the book, was the fact that I wrote an entire, section on the addiction to morality and how ridiculous it is.
So we're putting ourselves through this because we're punishing ourselves because no one else is punishing us.
No, we're punishing ourselves because we don't want other people to punish us. That's how we got into this position.
I see.
Is that, we basically were just ourselves. And at some point, Mom and Dad said, don't be yourself. Don't be that way. And we were like, uh-oh, there are consequences here for not being accepted. That means if I want to belong and be part of the clan, which, by the way, is survival for humans, then I have to be acceptable. And I'm sick of getting punished into being acceptable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically be my own policeman. And if I keep myself in check, then I'm not going to get yelled at by Mom. When it comes to society in general, we're fitting into a highly moral society. Our society says this is good, this is bad. And so we love to be good. Being good means being loved. And so if we equate punishment with being good or restoring goodness, then we're in real trouble.
Yeah.
Because we start to do that to ourselves so that we can be good enough to be loved.
So I'm going to read another passage from your book, and this is from tool number 22, Letting Yourself Off the Hook of Perfection. Those of us who are perfectionists are Olympic caliber self-saboteurs. We like to set cruel goals for ourselves. We set goals where failure is inevitable, not because the goal is in and of itself impossible to reach, but because the way we go about achieving it causes us to break down. Too often we pick goals that require so much effort and are so difficult to achieve that our minds and bodies suffer breakdowns to try to prevent us from killing ourselves. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit and how to manifest lofty goals in a way that doesn't lead us to this breakdown.
Well, basically, once we set a goal, we've got to let go of our attachment to that goal and realize that the only reason we wanted the goal is so that we could feel good, and so we will let it come to us in whatever way it has to come. I think it's ironic that the theme of this particular interview, we keep coming back to the idea that when you have to have it look a certain way, you are essentially limiting the universe, and also you're in an attitude of control. And you only feel like controlling something when you feel completely powerless. What we have got to do is say, okay, this is what I ultimately want. And now that I've put it out there and I'm going to start working towards it, I'm going to make it much more about what feels good here and now than I'm going to make it about this end goal. Any kind of attachment, ultimately, is a real recipe for disaster in this world. I don't know if you've noticed yet.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, so if you're setting it, okay, let's put a lofty goal out there. First of all, I guess that's a judgment call, right? If it's lofty or
Yes,
not. But
exactly. In fact, I encourage people to set as lofty a goals as they can, because anything short of that is going to be success.
right. Oh, that's true. But if you but how can you set those lofty goals and, like you say in the book, not get frustrated along the way? Self-sabotage type of thing. Is it maybe breaking them down to smaller goals, or is it?
Well, that's always a good idea, because when you accomplish the smaller goals, you see what you're really capable of, and that tends to improve self-confidence. But it's still, like, the problem in and of itself is the fact that it's not really the suffering that we haven't reached the goal. It's that what do we make it mean when we don't reach the goal? All of this boils down to the fact that we don't feel good enough or innately lovable unless we fill in the blank. I mean, people who haven't attached a sense of value to their achievements aren't in hell about whether they're going to achieve their achievements or not. I don't know if I wrote about this in the book, but basically doing the stint that I did with professional sports was just like the most amazing thing when it came to this realization, because, I was like, what is the difference between me? I have Olympic goals just like everyone else in this business. But, like, what's the difference between me, who's puking my guts out in the morning and miserable during this process, and that guy over there who's, like, smiling and in heaven? The difference is, if I lose, I'm worth nothing. Whereas he goes, oh, okay, I'm doing different next time.
I see.
So it's that whole thing about what do we make it mean? And that, of course, relates to childhood trauma, which, of course, relates to my next book I wrote, which I'm super jazzed about.
Tell me about your next book.
My next book is going through Hay House again. I think that as long as our relationship continues to go as good as it's going, I want them to be my long-term publisher. But essentially, they picked up this book not even having seen the manuscript, which is super awesome to switch from an author who, is like trying to get a manuscript published to an author where they're like, we don't even need to see the manuscript, just give it to us. And now, of course, getting flirted with by other publishers. But
that's a good place to be in. That's an excellent.
It is. It's like it's actually, see, and that's one of my dreams. That was one of my dreams, is because I'm just like, I just don't want it to be difficult for me to publish books. So, yay, walked into the manifestation. But basically,
well, I'm not. Don't go away from that, because I want to. I wonder did something change energetically about you that made it.
Yes.
So what is that? Because
it's going to annoy you, but basically, it was that I saw my own value. I literally got to a point that, people joke about this, that your successes will happen once it's no longer, it doesn't feel like you're reaching to achieve them. I got to a point where I was like, it doesn't matter whether a publisher wants to or doesn't want to publish my book. People want this material. And if people want this material, then they're going to get it one way or another. And so I started to have this attitude of like, they're actually lucky to get this material. And it didn't come from an attitude of like, I mean, you could say people are lucky to get this and have it be like a pompous thing where down deep you actually feel kind of crappy about yourself. That's what boasting is.
Right.
It really more came from this place where I was like, this is bigger than me. Telling this story or getting this information out is bigger than me. And so the universe wants it out there. And so whether these people are co-conspirators or not, really that's up to them.
So how do you get from the place where you were before to the place you are now? Or is there a way you can consciously do it, or it just had to be achieved?
I really feel like a lot of what people achieve, they incrementally start falling into. So there is an element of that where it's just like, no matter what, you don't have to know how it's going to happen. Ultimately, the universe will sort of work you into that mold where eventually it makes sense to you. But the main difference is I started working on self-love. It was like, I would actually let myself take it in when people would write back and say, oh my God, like that article you wrote just totally changed my life because of fill in the blank. I realized that I wasn't even letting myself take it in. And when I felt that feeling, I was like, you know what, I gotta quit this. So the next letter I get, I'm gonna actually breathe it in. That was my practice. It's like, how you can feel the intention coming off the words, kind of? I would actually breathe it into my being, and I'd be like, let this set in. This is actually meaningful to people. And that increased a little bit of how I saw myself. Even though ultimately we could argue whether that's good or not, to place your value in being of value to other people, it still was an improvement upon where I was.
So why would you do that when someone gave you a compliment? Why did you want to like put the shields up and not take it and not absorb it?
Because I don't want, me personally, because
Yeah,
I didn't want to lose anything. Basically, a lot of people who are in the same position that I was, where it was like, to take anything in is scary, because what if you like depend on it and then it goes away? Or what if that same approval turns to disapproval? Ugh, I better not even get into that marionette string type of situation
right.
from the get-go.
Because
And
I'm
it was real interesting for me to realize that most of my issue with receiving had to do with not wanting to lose whatever I received. But that was definitely one of those moments. But then I reminded myself, oh, wait a minute. I'm not a child anymore with two adults in my life and no one else. I'm in a situation where I'm in the world. And so if somebody stops feeding me full of approval, I can get it anywhere I want to. I can go there or there or there, somewhere else.
right.
So the universe it looked a lot more abundant, I guess, to me when I started looking at the world that way.
Well, of course, I'm asking this because I feel the same way. I mean, when I get compliments, I don't take them in. I don't want to hear it.
Yep.
I was like, let me know what I can fix. I'm fine with that, but I don't want to hear any compliments. And I don't read book reviews of my books.
I don't either, though.
Okay. Okay. So
Because I don't want to see the bad stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So talk a little bit more. Why do you? Because I guess for the reason I don't look at reviews is like, I don't want someone. I don't want to necessarily believe the bad stuff because it's one person's opinion, and therefore I feel the same thing about the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
And is it the same way?
Yeah, it's just like if you're used to getting hurt, you don't want to depend on anything.
Okay.
You don't want to let the negatives in, obviously, because of what it means, and we make it impacts us because we don't have those big walls that say, I'm awesome, screw you, you're the one that's wrong. It's like there's enough self-doubt that we basically take the negative in, but then the positive, it's like, I don't want to get addicted to this or dependent on this because it's going to go away. It's like we're almost expecting to be starving, so I'd rather just not eat in the first place. It's better than experiencing the fall, if you catch my drift.
Right. I get it. That's funny. So I have these last few questions, and they're all about your chapter on self-sabotage, which,
Okay.
as it happens, and you talk about in that chapter the 8 faces of self-sabotage. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to go over a few of those that are relevant to writers. And the first one is one we've just been talking about is self-doubt. Mm-hmm. It's so easy as a writer, especially if you're trying to get your work published, to begin to doubt yourself and your abilities. How do you overcome that?
The way that I overcame that is I stopped making it about me getting my work published, and I made it about what I wanted to give to other people. And it depends on what I actually doesn't, you know what? No, it doesn't have to depend on what genre you write for. I feel like at some point, those of us who are writers get to realize that, like, the joy that we're putting in people's hands when we're telling a good story, it doesn't matter whether you're in the self-help industry or not. What you're putting in somebody's hands, it's adding value to their life. So at some point, it's like I either get to deprive other people or I get to give to other people. And when you make it about that, it's less about you being received or rejected. It's more about getting something to people who want or need it.
Right.
And that really did change the dynamic for me.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because when I was writing Mastering Astral Projection, what I was doing was writing the book that I would have wanted to read as a 20-year-old. And so
Exactly. Oh my God, you get it. See, that's exactly what you should do.
And that was what of course that one was the first one that was published. So it seems like that focus on giving as opposed to making it about you and your work is key. Okay, so the other one is self-criticism, because we're writing and we have this inner voice, and there are times when I'll write something and I think this is amazing stuff. I can't wait to share this with people, and then I'll read the next day and I was like, this really sucks. And how do we quiet that self-criticism, that inner voice? How would you put that to rest?
Well, I think when I'm in a real self-critical mood, there's usually an underlying emotional state that I'm not willing to face. I think that needs to be faced. That's what I've noticed anyways. And so I really don't focus on the thoughts themselves. I focus on the fact that these thoughts are basically just generating themselves because of this emotional state. Now let's just sit with that emotional state, or do something, say, that gets us out of that emotional state, and then the thoughts that come into my consciousness are going to shift. And that's what I've noticed working the best for me.
So,
because like arguing with the thoughts just doesn't really work very well. It's just sort of, you could do that all day long, you know?
Right, you're resisting at that point.
Yes.
Teal, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. This was Brian Mercer for Author Magazine. Today I've been speaking with Teal Swan, whose latest book is Shadows Before Dawn, Finding the Light of Self-Love Through Your Darkest Times.